What if I told you that some of the most significant figures in the Bible, figures whose stories should be cherished and remembered, are missing from the pages of church history? You may be wondering why this is so. After all, the Bible is the most influential book in human history, and Christianity claims a foundation that spans all nations, races, and peoples. But despite this, the lives and contributions of black figures in Scripture have often been obscured, erased, or entirely left out of the narratives we've been taught about the church's past. Think about it. When we look at the artwork, the hymns, the sermons, the history books, what do we see? More often than not, we see a Europeanized, whitewashed version of Christianity, where black people and their rich biblical heritage are sidelined, overlooked, or flat out ignored. This isn't just a small detail. It's a distortion of the truth. It's a historical erasure that does more than just harm. It robs the church of its full, beautiful story. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking. Sure, there are some mentions of people of African descent in the Bible, but that's not really the focus of the Christian narrative, is it? That's exactly the kind of thinking we need to challenge today. Because if we don't address this issue head-on, we will continue to miss out on the depth and richness that God has woven into the fabric of His Word. The Bible is not a story of a single people, a single ethnicity, or a single race. It's a global story, a story of humanity, a story of God's kingdom being established across nations and peoples. And yet, for far too long, the voices of black figures in the Bible have been left out of our history books, our teachings, and even our church traditions. We've been taught that Christianity is a European religion, that the church's earliest leaders were exclusively from certain regions, and that the significant contributions of black people in the Bible don't matter. But here's the truth we must recognize. This is a lie. This erasure is a betrayal of what the Bible actually teaches and the vastness of God's love for all people. Throughout this video, we're going to uncover the hidden stories of black figures in the Bible who played pivotal roles in the spread of the gospel, the shaping of Christian doctrine, and the fulfillment of God's eternal plan. We'll explore how these figures were often excluded from church history books and the cultural forces, many rooted in racism and colonialism, that perpetuated this erasure. And we will ask the most important question of all: why has this happened? Why is it that so many of these figures, whose stories should inspire us, have been buried under the weight of a history that refuses to acknowledge the full truth? But this isn't just a question about history. This is about our present and our future. It's about recognizing that the full richness of God's kingdom is a story that includes all peoples, all nations, and all races, especially those who have been left out, marginalized, and forgotten. It's about learning to see the Bible as it truly is, a document of inclusion, not exclusion, a history of salvation that spans the globe. So, as we dive into this discussion, I want you to open your heart and mind to something you may not have been taught before. Because the truth is, black figures in the Bible didn't just exist. They were central to the story of God's people, and their stories deserve to be heard, honored, and celebrated in the church today. Let's go on this journey together. Let's find out why these figures have been left out, and why now is the time to bring them back into the narrative, to give them the honor and recognition they deserve. Let's take a moment to look at the Bible's diversity, and how that diversity is often overlooked. The Bible isn't a monolithic document, written in a vacuum with only one culture, race, or ethnicity in mind. No, the Bible spans centuries and cultures, traversing vast territories that include Africa, the Middle East, and Europe. It's a book that reaches far beyond the walls of ancient Israel. The stories within it take place in cities like Jerusalem, but they also take place in cities and regions like Egypt, Ethiopia, and Kush. And yet, despite the vastness of the biblical world, many of the black figures who shape this story have been buried in history's shadows. Consider the story of Moses. Moses, the great liberator of the Israelites, the man God used to lead his people out of Egypt, was married to a woman from Kush. Kush is often associated with the region that is now Sudan, a region known for its rich history and civilization. Zipporah, Moses' wife, is one of the most significant women in the Bible, yet she is often reduced to the background of a story that should highlight her important role in Moses' life and the Exodus. But it's not just her story. There are numerous references in the Old Testament to people from Kush, Egypt, and other African nations. Yet, how often do we hear about these nations or these people in our Bible studies, our Sunday school lessons, or our sermons? How often are they elevated as key players in the unfolding drama of salvation? Then there's the story of the Ethiopian eunuch in the book of Acts. A man of great influence, a high-ranking official from a far-off land, who was seeking the truth about God, and whose life was forever changed by his encounter with Philip. His story is one of transformation. But again, we don't hear much about him in our usual teachings on Acts. Why is that? And why do we hardly ever mention that the Ethiopian eunuch was likely from one of the wealthiest, most powerful nations of the time? Why don't we celebrate the fact that this man of African descent became one of the first converts to Christianity in the New Testament, playing a pivotal role in spreading the gospel to a land that would become a powerful center of Christian faith? Consider also Simon of Cyrene, a man from North Africa, who was compelled to carry the cross of Jesus on the way to his crucifixion. Simon was not a Jewish man, but his act of service became an indelible part of the Passion story. And yet, how often do we hear about Simon's African heritage when we talk about the events leading to the cross? How often is his act of obedience mentioned in connection to the broader narrative of Jesus' sacrifice? The Bible is teeming with people of African descent, people who were not passive onlookers, but active participants in the unfolding story of God's salvation. They weren't merely bystanders or side characters. They were integral to the story, with roles that shaped the history of God's people. But for some reason, we have not given them the attention they deserve, and we've often downplayed their significance in favor of a narrative that is more comfortable, more familiar, and more centered around a Europeanized version of Christianity. Now, why is this the case? The question must be asked. Why is it that black figures in the Bible have been systematically left out of our understanding of church history? The answer, unfortunately, is tangled in the web of history, power, and race. The rise of European colonialism, particularly in the 16th and 17th centuries, shaped much of the Christian narrative we know today. During this period, European powers began to establish dominance over much of the world, including vast regions of Africa. Christianity was spread by missionaries and conquerors alike, but the version of Christianity they brought with them often reflected the racial prejudices and biases of their time. When colonial powers shaped the church's history books, they also shaped the story of who was included and who was excluded. The narratives of early African Christians, such as the Christian church in Ethiopia, Egypt, and North Africa, were either minimized or outright ignored. Figures like Augustine of Hippo, one of the most influential Christian theologians in history, were written off as exceptions or dismissed because their African identity didn't fit the European-centered narrative of Christianity's pure origins. The impact of these colonial ideologies went far beyond the 16th and 17th centuries. It has rippled through the centuries, shaping how we view church history today. In many cases, church history books have relegated black figures in the Bible to the margins, treating them as footnotes in a story that is largely told through the lens of European Christianity. This is a distortion of the truth, one that serves to silence the contributions of black people, not only in the Bible, but in the entire Christian tradition. The cultural and theological shifts of this period were deeply rooted in the assumption of European superiority, which was often tied to racial theories that sought to divide humanity into categories of worth and importance. These ideas didn't just shape the secular world. They deeply influenced how Christianity was understood and practiced. The narrative of a white European Jesus, along with a white European church, became the dominant story. And in this narrative, the rich and diverse African contributions to Christianity were pushed aside. This historical erasure didn't happen by accident. It wasn't just a failure to recognize the contributions of black figures in the Bible. It was a deliberate attempt to create a narrative that excluded those who were seen as other, as inferior, as outside of the dominant European narrative. This erasure continues to affect how the church views itself today. It affects how black people see their place in the church and how the broader world understands the origins of Christianity. But the truth is, the Bible's diversity is undeniable. From the land of Cush to the cities of Egypt, the Bible is rich with the stories of people whose faith, strength, and influence have shaped the very course of human history. And yet, despite this, the church has often ignored or neglected to tell their stories. This isn't just a historical oversight, it's a distortion of the gospel itself. Because the gospel is a message of reconciliation, of breaking down walls between people of every race, every culture, every nation. To ignore the black figures in the Bible is to ignore a crucial part of the Christian story. So, as we begin to uncover this lost history, we must ask, why has this erasure happened? Why have these stories been left out of our church history books? The answer is complex, but it's a question that demands an honest and critical look at our past. Only by confronting this issue can we begin to correct the distortions and reclaim the full, rich story of the Bible, a story that includes all people, all nations, and all races. Let's take a step back and consider the deep, unbroken connection between the African church and the Bible's story. So much of what we know about the early church, the spread of Christianity, and the shaping of Christian doctrine is rooted in Africa. And yet, for many people, this connection remains obscure or even completely unknown. One of the earliest centers of Christian thought and practice was in Africa, in places like Alexandria, Egypt. Alexandria was not only a major hub of learning and scholarship in the ancient world, but also one of the most influential Christian centers in the first few centuries after Christ. The city boasted one of the first Christian schools, where early Christian theologians like Origen, Clement of Alexandria, and Athanasius were taught. These figures were instrumental in shaping Christian doctrine and defending the faith against heresies. Origen, for example, is credited with laying the groundwork for Christian biblical exegesis, while Athanasius was one of the foremost defenders of the doctrine of the Trinity. Egypt, along with other African regions like Ethiopia and Nubia, produced some of the most significant theological and spiritual minds of the early church. The African church played a pivotal role in shaping what we now understand as Orthodox Christian doctrine. It wasn't just that these regions were among the first to embrace Christianity, it was that they were the ones who helped define it. In Ethiopia, the church has been a presence since the time of the apostles. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church claims to be the oldest Christian church in the world, with traditions that stretch back to the 4th century and possibly even earlier. According to tradition, the Ethiopian eunuch we read about in Acts 8 was one of the first converts, and he brought the gospel back to his people in Ethiopia. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church remains one of the oldest and most influential branches of Christianity today. Yet the role of this church in Christian history is often downplayed in Western accounts. And let's not forget about the Coptic Church in Egypt, one of the oldest Christian denominations in the world. The Copts, who trace their lineage directly to the ancient Egyptians, have preserved their Christian faith through centuries of persecution, from the Roman Empire to the Islamic caliphates and beyond. The Coptic Church was instrumental in preserving the Christian faith during the early centuries and was a beacon of Christian witness long before the rise of Western European Christianity. The Coptic Orthodox Church continues to thrive today, holding on to ancient traditions that have shaped Christianity in ways that the West has often overlooked. Africa's contribution to the growth and establishment of the early church is not just historical, it's theological as well. Figures like Augustine of Hippo, born in what is now Algeria, were essential in developing the theological framework of the church. Augustine's writings, particularly his works on original sin, grace, and the nature of the church, laid the foundation for much of Western Christian theology. Augustine is considered one of the most important Christian thinkers in history. Yet his African roots are often underplayed or ignored in favor of focusing solely on his theological contributions. This pattern of erasing or minimizing African contributions to the faith is deeply problematic. It perpetuates a skewed narrative of church history that fails to acknowledge the central role that African peoples and cultures played in the development of Christianity. By focusing only on European or Western figures, we rob ourselves of a fuller understanding of the universal nature of the Christian faith and the global story that the Bible tells. The African church, with its rich theological traditions, deep spirituality, and commitment to the gospel, was integral to the early church. Yet its contribution has been marginalized, particularly in Western theological education and church history. The churches of Africa were not peripheral to the story of the early church. They were central. The African presence in the early church is not something to be overlooked or dismissed. It's a vital part of the church's heritage, one that should be celebrated and embraced by all Christians. This history is not just important for understanding the church's past. It's crucial for understanding the nature of the church today. The church in Africa has grown exponentially in the last century, and it's now the largest Christian population in the world. The African church, once marginalized in church history, is now a global powerhouse. Yet, we must recognize that this power doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists because of the foundation that was laid centuries ago by African theologians, scholars, and saints. It exists because of the ongoing witness of the African church, which has refused to let its rich legacy be erased. As we look to the future, we must remember that the African church's legacy is not just a thing of the past. It's an ongoing reality. It's a living testament to the fact that Christianity is a global faith, one that has been shaped by people from all corners of the world. And as we move forward, we must reclaim the lost history of the African church, not just to honor the past, but to ensure that future generations of Christians understand the full, vibrant story of God's people. When we fail to recognize the contributions of Black people to the Bible and church history, we rob ourselves of the richness that God intended for His people. We erase the diverse and beautiful tapestry that God has woven throughout the ages. But it's not too late. We can still rediscover these stories, honor these contributions, and rebuild a more accurate and inclusive narrative of the Christian faith. This leads us to the important question of race in biblical interpretation. Race is a concept that has been understood differently across time and culture, and the Bible itself is often used to justify various views of race. Understanding how race was viewed in biblical times and how it has been interpreted in modern times is essential to reclaiming the full story of black figures in the Bible. The Bible itself does not define race in the way we do today. In the ancient world, ethnicity was more about cultural identity than biological traits, and people were identified by their region, language, or heritage rather than by a modern understanding of race. For example, the Bible tells us about the Cushites, Egyptians, and other peoples who lived in what we now consider Africa. These were not just distant nations in the Bible. They were key players in the story of God's people. Take the story of Moses' wife, Zipporah, as an example. She was a Cushite, a woman from a region that is often associated with modern-day Sudan. Yet in the story, we see how God accepted her and her people into his plan of salvation. Moses, despite his high standing in Israel, married a woman from a different culture, and this was never presented as a problem. In fact, it was a testament to God's inclusive nature. The Bible consistently shows us that God's people are from every tribe, tongue, and nation. The idea that one race or group of people is more favored by God than another runs counter to the entire message of Scripture. But over time, this message has been distorted. In the West, particularly in the wake of colonialism, the Bible was often used to justify racial hierarchies, with white Europeans positioned as superior and other races, especially black people, positioned as inferior. This misinterpretation of the Bible has caused immense harm, and the scars of this legacy continue to affect the church today. When we fail to see the biblical message of unity, we also fail to understand the true nature of God's kingdom. The message of the gospel transcends race and ethnicity. Galatians 3:28 clearly tells us, "There is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus." This passage highlights the radical inclusivity of the gospel. There are no second-class citizens in God's kingdom. And yet, for far too long, the church has ignored this message, choosing instead to emphasize divisions based on race and ethnicity. The church's historical misinterpretation of race has had profound consequences. It has not only shaped how we view the Bible, but it has also shaped how we view each other. The continued marginalization of black figures in biblical history, whether by omission or misrepresentation, contributes to a theology that reinforces racial divides rather than healing them. We must reclaim the true message of Scripture. We must embrace the fact that the Bible's message is one of unity, of reconciliation, of bringing together people from every nation, tribe, and tongue. When we understand the Bible's true teaching on race, we can begin to heal the divisions that have plagued the church for centuries. We can celebrate the rich diversity that God intended for his people, and we can recognize the central role that black figures in the Bible played in God's plan of salvation. Only then will we be able to fully appreciate the depth and breadth of the story that the Bible tells. One that is for all people, of all races, everywhere. Now, let's talk about something deeply personal for many people: black identity and the church's legacy. For centuries, black communities have been wrestling with the question of where they fit in the broader story of Christianity. For many, the history they've been taught has been one of exclusion. Stories of black people erased, their ancestors' faithfulness overlooked, and their struggles hidden from view. This erasure has left many black Christians wondering, where are our biblical heroes? Where are the examples of faith that reflect our story, our culture, and our identity? And most importantly, How do we reconcile the Christianity that was brought to us through slavery with the faith of our ancestors who lived in Africa, a continent rich with its own deep, vibrant Christian traditions long before colonialism ever touched its shores? This disconnection between Black identity and the broader Christian narrative is a problem that is not only historical, it continues to impact the way Black Christians experience their faith today. For generations, Black people have been taught to see themselves in the margins of biblical history, to feel that their ancestors' stories don't matter in the grand narrative of God's redemptive work. But this is a lie, and it's a lie that has harmed both the Black church and the global church. The Black church's story is not one of mere survival or reaction to oppression. It's a story of profound resilience, spiritual depth, and power. It is the story of a people who, despite centuries of marginalization, have maintained their faith and even used their faith as a tool for liberation. The spiritual practices and hymns that originated in the Black church are powerful testimonies of the ways in which God has been present in the lives of His people, even in the darkest of times. One of the clearest examples of this is found in the history of slavery in the United States. Enslaved African people, forcibly brought to a land that denied them their basic humanity, found in the Bible not a tool of oppression, but a source of hope, strength, and resistance. The Bible, for them, was not the weapon of the oppressor. It was a beacon of liberation. The same scriptures that were used to justify slavery were also used by enslaved Black people to claim their humanity, their worth, and their God-given rights. The story of the Exodus, with its promise of freedom and deliverance, became central to the theology of Black slaves. It was the story that reminded them that God saw them, that God was with them, and that deliverance was coming. In the Black church today, this legacy continues. It's a legacy of faith, of endurance, and of knowing that God has always been present in the struggle for freedom. And yet, even in today's church, we still see the effects of centuries of exclusion. Many Black Christians feel disconnected from the broader church history because their own history has been erased, manipulated, or ignored. But there are many efforts within the Black church to reclaim and celebrate the Black presence in the Bible, and these efforts are critical to the healing of the church as a whole. We must understand that reclaiming this history is not just about looking back to the past. It's about shaping the present and future. When Black Christians begin to see themselves not as an afterthought in the Bible's narrative, but as central to God's plan, it transforms how they engage with the Scriptures. It strengthens their faith and identity, giving them a deeper understanding of their place in God's kingdom. Now, let's talk about the role of biblical prophecies and how they offer empowerment for Black people today. The Bible is filled with promises of redemption, inclusion, and justice for all people. But these promises often have a unique resonance for Black people, who have faced centuries of oppression, dehumanization, and marginalization. In these prophecies, we see not only God's heart for justice, but also His desire to restore and uplift the oppressed. These passages offer more than hope. They offer empowerment. They remind us that God sees the struggles of His people and that He has a plan to make things right. One of the most powerful prophecies comes from the book of Isaiah, where God declares that He will bring salvation to all nations, including those who have been oppressed and excluded. In Isaiah 19, God speaks of a time when Egypt, Assyria, and Israel will be united under God's reign, a time when people from all nations will come together to worship the one true God. This prophecy speaks not only to the future restoration of the world, but also to the inclusion of nations and peoples who have been historically marginalized. For Black Christians, This passage is a reminder that God's plan for salvation includes them, fully, completely, and without reservation. In another powerful prophecy, in Isaiah 56:7, God promises that His house will be a house of prayer for all nations. This isn't just a statement about physical spaces of worship. It's a statement about the global nature of God's kingdom. It's a promise that all people, regardless of race or background, have a place in God's family. This is the heart of the gospel, the idea that the gospel is for all people. And yet, for centuries, the church has been guilty of failing to live out this truth. By sidelining black figures in the Bible and ignoring the African roots of Christianity, the church has failed to embody the inclusivity that the gospel so clearly proclaims. For black Christians, these prophecies are not just historical promises. They are living, breathing truths that empower them today. They are a call to stand in the fullness of their identity as children of God, as heirs to a rich spiritual heritage that stretches back to the earliest days of the church. These prophecies are a reminder that God's kingdom is not just an abstract idea. It is a real, tangible reality that includes all people, and that black people have always been a part of this plan. In the New Testament, we see the fulfillment of these prophecies in the person of Jesus Christ, who came to bring salvation to all people, regardless of race or ethnicity. Jesus' ministry was marked by a radical inclusivity that broke down the barriers of race, class, and gender. He ministered to the poor, the outcasts, and those who were excluded from society. His message of love and redemption transcended the cultural boundaries of his time, and in doing so, he demonstrated the fullness of God's kingdom. For black Christians today, Jesus' ministry offers a powerful model for how to engage with the world. It's a call to challenge the systems of oppression and injustice that continue to plague our society. It's a call to stand with the marginalized, the oppressed, and the excluded. And it's a call to remember that God's kingdom is one of justice, reconciliation, and equality. When we understand the Bible's message of inclusion, we begin to see that the gospel is not just about personal salvation. It's about the restoration of all things, including the restoration of relationships between people of different races. It's about the coming together of all nations, all tribes, and all peoples under the banner of Christ. And when we embrace this truth, we are empowered to be agents of change in the world. We are empowered to live out the message of the gospel in a way that reflects God's heart for justice, equality, and reconciliation. So, as we look at the story of black figures in the Bible and the prophecies that point to their inclusion in God's plan, we see that this isn't just about acknowledging the past, it's about understanding the present and shaping the future. It's about reclaiming a history that has been lost and restoring the fullness of God's kingdom. And it's about empowering black Christians to see themselves as central to the story of God's redemptive work in the world. This is the true story of the gospel, and it's a story that includes all people, all races, and all nations. When we examine the role of the black church in society, we cannot ignore its monumental contribution to both the spiritual and social landscape. The black church has historically been more than just a place of worship. It has been a sanctuary, a community center, and a pillar of social activism. From the earliest days of slavery to the modern era, the black church has been at the forefront of movements for justice, equality, and liberation, offering a voice to those who have been silenced by society. During the era of slavery in the United States, the black church served as a place of spiritual refuge, but it also became a space for collective action and resistance. Enslaved black people were often denied the right to worship freely or openly, but they found ways to create their own churches, where they could sing hymns of freedom and hope, hear the gospel of liberation, and draw strength from their shared faith. The church was a place where they could come together, share their stories, and find solidarity in their struggle for freedom. The spirituals they sang, full of coded messages and cries for deliverance, became anthems of resistance. These songs carried the weight of generations of oppression, yet they also carried the hope of eventual freedom. The Black Church became a space where God's promises of justice and freedom could be claimed as their own. As the abolitionist movement gained momentum, the Black Church became a powerful force in the fight for emancipation. Figures like Frederick Douglass and Sojourner Truth, who were both deeply influenced by their Christian faith, found strength in the Bible's message of freedom and liberation. Douglass, in particular, spoke often about how Christianity had given him the strength to endure the horrors of slavery, and how it had inspired him to fight for the freedom of all enslaved people. The church became a crucial battleground in the fight for civil rights and justice, a place where Black leaders could speak out against the dehumanizing effects of slavery and fight for the dignity and equality of their people. Even after emancipation, the Black Church remained central to the struggle for justice. During the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s, leaders like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and other clergy members used the church as a platform for social activism. Dr. King, a Baptist minister, famously led the March on Washington and delivered his iconic "I Have a Dream" speech from the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. But his faith was at the heart of his activism. He was deeply committed to the idea that Christianity called for a radical transformation of society, one that would ensure justice and equality for all people, regardless of their race or background. The Black Church's role in society has always been intertwined with the struggle for racial justice, but it has also been a place of cultural preservation and empowerment. In the face of oppression and marginalization, the church has served as a refuge, a place where Black people could affirm their worth and dignity as children of God. It is a place where Black culture and traditions have been celebrated, where leaders have emerged to fight for social change, and where communities have found strength to endure hardship and injustice. The Black Church is not just a building. It is a testament to the resilience and faith of a people who have been both oppressed and uplifted by the gospel. As we look to the future, the Black Church continues to be a vital force in society. It is no longer just a place of refuge. It is a place of transformation. Today, the Black Church is helping to lead the charge in the fight for racial justice, economic equality, and social change. It is a place where young people are finding their voices and their purpose, and where new leaders are rising to take the mantle of activism and advocacy. The legacy of the Black Church is not one of victimhood, but one of triumph and empowerment. It is a story of a people who have refused to be defined by their circumstances and have instead embraced their God-given identity as agents of change in the world. The Black Church has been at the heart of Christianity's impact on the world, and it will continue to be at the forefront of the Church's work in the world. As we move forward, we must recognize and honor the vital role that the Black Church plays in shaping the future of Christianity. By embracing this legacy, we can ensure that the full story of the Bible is told, that the contributions of Black people are recognized, and that the message of justice, freedom, and equality is proclaimed for all to hear. Finally, as we come to the conclusion of this journey, we must ask ourselves, what are we going to do about the history we've uncovered? What are we going to do with the truth that Black figures in the Bible have always been central to the story of God's salvation, and that their erasure from church history has been a great injustice? The answer lies not just in acknowledging this truth, but in taking active steps to restore it. It's time to reclaim the full story of the Bible. It's time to give voice to those who have been silenced. It's time to honor the black figures in the Bible who have been omitted from our teachings, and to restore their rightful place in our understanding of God's plan for the world. When we do this, we not only honor the history of black Christians, but also honor the broader history of Christianity itself. We recognize that the church is not a single, homogeneous body, but a diverse, global family that spans the world's cultures and peoples. But this process of restoration is not just about history. It's about our present and future. It's about how we, as a church, choose to live out the message of the gospel in a way that reflects God's heart for justice, reconciliation, and unity. When we acknowledge the full richness of God's kingdom, we embrace the reality that there is no place for racial division or exclusion in the church. The gospel is for all people, and all people are equal in God's eyes. As we move forward, let's make it our mission to study the full breadth of church history, to understand the contributions of all people, and to build a more inclusive and just church that truly reflects the kingdom of God. Let us honor the black figures in the Bible, reclaim the history that has been lost, and ensure that future generations know the full, beautiful story of God's love for all people. It is only by embracing the fullness of God's plan for humanity that we can fulfill our calling to be the body of Christ, a body that is united, diverse, and whole. And so, I challenge you today, embrace this truth, reclaim this history, honor the black figures in the Bible, and commit to being part of a church that reflects God's heart for all people. When we do this, we take one step closer to living out the full glory of God's kingdom on earth. Let this be our mission. Let this be our call to action.